Hi, everybody. It's Tamara from Moogly, and thank you so much for joining me today for this Yarnspirations Lunch and Learn. Since we are live, I'm going to take just a moment here to hit refresh on my laptop and hopefully bring up this video so I can see any of your questions. We are live again on the Yarnspirations Facebook page. So let me just get over here and make sure that I can see this video here. Looks like I'm going to need to go to the Yarnspirations homepage. So just need to get it to load up one moment. But hi again. I'm so glad you guys could join us today. Thank you again for doing this. I know we're coming in an hour later than usual for our Lunch and Learn, but we had a power outage this morning. So here we are. Luckily, it was a planned power outage, but, you know, we just got to work with what we've got. So today we are talking specifically about the Bernat Lemon Peel Stitch Crochet Blanket. You can see right here is the pattern for this. The Yarnspirations team should be dropping the links for this in the description and probably in the chat a few times. This is part of a wonderful collection of patterns, roundup that Yarnspirations has put up on yarnspirations.com for blankets made with Bernat that are perfect for beginners. It's a lot of bees. So it's, you know, getting started with Bernat blanket or something like that. If you scroll down a little bit on the page, this blanket is in fact kind of the image for the whole roundup. And it really is a beautiful blanket. And it's wonderful for beginners. It uses basically the chain stitch, single crochet, and double crochet, and that's it. So great for beginners, great for those who are looking for something relaxing to make. And I just think this pattern actually makes a really pretty texture. So for this pattern today, we are using the called for yarn, Bernat Blanket Extra Thick. You can see how big this skein is. It's too big to even show on my hand camera. This is a fantastic yarn, and you can see just how thick that yarn actually is. Now, if you love Bernat blanket like I do, but maybe you don't have the extra thick or you like to use the standard Bernat blanket, no problem at all. You can use whatever size you like because the Yarnspirations design team was kind enough to include the stitch multiple right in the pattern. So we have that right there. So you can actually make this blanket in any size using any of the sizes of Bernat blanket that you like to use. So since today we are using the great big Bernat blanket extra thick, we're also using a great big hook as called for in the pattern. This is a 25mm crochet hook. I don't believe this one is currently available, but there are some other ones available out there right now. So you can look for 25mm crochet hooks, or like I say, you can use your standard Bernat blanket to make this pattern if you prefer. So let's go ahead and switch over to the hand camera and we'll take a look at our little sample here and how we make this pattern. Alrighty, we're going to bring it in here and switch over. Okay, great. We've got it switched over. I do see one question popping up right away. Can you use worsted weight as well? Absolutely. You could use fingering weight for this pattern if you wanted to. Be a whole lot more stitches, of course, but you could absolutely use any weight of yarn you like. So if we bring in the written pattern right here, you can see it gives its measurements as written. It's 52 inches by 60 inches. But this note gives us that stitch multiple, and this is the easiest one of all. Chain any multiple of 2 plus 2, so an even number. Basically, if you're using a different weight yarn, you want to make a different size, even if you're using the same yarn, you can just chain until you have the width of the blanket you want, and then chain 2 more, and you'll be all set. With this yarn for this size, it calls for starting with a chain of 28. I'm not going to be making the full size today, we'll just make a little swatch. You can see here, though, this is an example. And it's a little bit easier to see in person. Maybe if I hold it up sideways to the camera, you can see that great texture that is created with this pattern. And it really is totally reversible. It makes a totally reversible fabric, which is great for the instructions. We do a 2-row repeat, and then we just work until the blanket measures 60 inches or as long as you want it to be. So that is absolutely as easy as it is. So let me go ahead and pull this off camera here, but not on top of my instructions, so I can follow along too. And we'll bring in our yarn and hook. I don't have any of the pretty gold color showed in the pattern. I've actually used it all up because I enjoyed it so much, but this is a really pretty rose color that's also available. So when you're working with a big thick yarn like this, and you go to put in your slip knot, it's important to come in, I think, at least a good 10 inches or so, just because you can see just how much yarn that stitch is going to take up. And you do want to make sure you have enough length to weave in your ends. And with this yarn, I actually recommend that you sew in your ends with a little bit of sewing thread as well. Same thing when you join a new skein of yarn. You can actually just sew those ends together at the tip and use it as one long continuous strand. So if you're making a full-size blanket, you'll need more than one skein of yarn. That's how you can join them together. All right, so let's go ahead and start our chaining. Like I said, I'm not going to make a full-size blanket on camera here today. It's just lunch and learn. Got to do it over lunchtime, so we'll just make a little swatch. But you could actually get pretty far in a lunch hour, I think, with this pattern, if you're not talking through the whole thing like I am here. So here you can see I've already got 4 chains made. I'm going to make probably 4 more. That's a good even number for our little swatch here today. You do want to chain these a little bit loosely. And what that means with this yarn in particular, because it has all this texture, that as you chain and pull through, you just want to give a little extra tug. Make sure that chain comes up all the way and you're not kind of still working down in that previous stitch. Of course, now I've lost count, so let's see where we're at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I need 1 more. There we go. So now that 8. That's a multiple of 2 plus 2, basically any even number. Then we're ready to begin. Now, they do mark out right side and wrong side on this pattern. Again, I think this pattern and this stitch pattern, if you will, is really reversible. So you can keep track of that if you'd like, or just continue crocheting, and not worry about it too much. So to begin, we're going to start with a single crochet. So we're going to skip the chain closest to our hook right there and go to the next chain. I prefer to work into the back hump of the chain, but you can work under any loop you like as long as you keep it consistent. So I'm going to flip that over so I can go under the back hump. And the reason I really like working the back hump for this pattern and patterns like it is because this one does not actually include a border. So by working into that back hump, we end up with the 2 loops along the bottom edge, and it just makes it look more like the top edge. So I'm going to go ahead and go and skip that. Let's do that again. We'll skip that chain closest to the hook, go into the next chain for a single crochet. There we go. So that's the first stitch of the row. Then the next stitch is a double crochet. And this begins our repeat, 2-stitch repeat. Since we chained an even number, but we skipped 1, we're going to have an odd number of stitches. So the first one's a single crochet. Now we begin our 2-stitch repeat, double crochet in the next stitch. You do have to use just a little bit more muscle to pull this yarn through. And then, because it is so thick, I need to pull up some more already for my skein. Thought I'd set some aside here, but we ran through it already. There we go. So we've got our single crochet and our double crochet. Second stitch of our 2-stitch repeat is a single crochet. That's all we do, back and forth. Single crochet, double crochet, single crochet, double crochet, all the way across. And since it's an odd number of stitches, and we began with a single crochet, we'll want to end with a single crochet on this row. There we go. So there's our double crochet, followed by a single crochet, just back and forth. Now, the single crochets, as you know, are shorter than a double crochet. So what that does in this pattern is it causes those double crochets to sort of fold over or squinch on themselves. That's the technical term, right? And but what that does is it creates that amazing texture in this one. So it's really lovely. We've come to our last chain there, and we've got a single crochet in it. So we know we ended up in the right spot. So no matter how many stitches you start with, you should have an even number of chains. Skip that first chain, so you've got an odd number of stitches. First row, we start with a single crochet, and we end with a single crochet. But it's single, double, single, double, single, double, all the way across, ending with a single. Super easy, right? So then we're ready for row 2. Row 2 begins our 2-row repeat. So we've got 2 rows that we repeat over and over until the very end of the blanket. There's no finishing row that you need to do. Like I say, there's no border for this one. We just do these next 2 rows for the rest of the blanket. So row 2 begins with a chain 3. And this is going to be your standard chain 3 double crochet substitute. So if you aren't a fan of the chain 3 for your first double crochet, you can use any of the other methods that you like to use instead. There are different ones out there like stacked single crochet, chainless starting double crochet, one of my favorites, or you can just stick with the standard chain 3 if you prefer. We'll turn our work over here, and since we did chain 3, that counts as our first double crochet for this row. So we want to make sure to skip the first stitch and go to the second stitch. And there we put a single crochet. It's the same stitch pattern we had before, but now they're reversed. Before we started and ended with a single crochet, row 2, we're going to begin and end with a double crochet. So you can see I'm working single crochets into double crochets and I'll be working double crochets into the single crochets. So it sort of offsets the stitch pattern, and it works to create that great texture by pulling down those single crochets. So don't worry if you're making this one. Don't think you need to pull up your single crochets to the height of a double crochet. We want to pull those double crochets kind of almost down to the height of a single crochet as we make the rest of that row, because it's going to create that really beautiful texture. There we go. So there's a double crochet, single crochet. Now on our little swatch here, we're already at the end. We began with a double crochet, so we want to end with a double crochet. And there's our very last stitch. Now, if you want to, you can use stitch markers to help you with this pattern, especially if you are a beginner. I always recommend using stitch markers, in the first stitch of every row. Now, with this great big yarn, that is a little bit trickier because most stitch markers are designed for a more standard weight of yarn. So what I like to do with this one, if you do want to use the stitch markers, you can just put them around sort of one loop of that stitch. Don't try and necessarily get both loops of that top of that stitch into that tiny little stitch marker, but you can definitely use it around one of those loops to help you keep track of those first and last stitches of each row, and that will really help you know that you begin and end in the right place and keep the sides of your blanket really even. So that was our row 2. Began with a double crochet and ended with a double crochet. Double, single, double, single, double, single, all the way across, ending with a double. The second row of our repeat is row 3. It's going to look an awful lot like row 1, but now we're working into stitches instead of the chain. We start with a chain 1 and turn, or turn and chain 1, however you prefer to do it. And now we're going to put a single crochet right in that first stitch. So if we're starting with a single crochet, we're going to end with a single crochet. Single crochet went into a double crochet. Now there's a single crochet. We just made a single crochet. It's time to put in a double crochet. So even if you get a little bit lost, you can look at your stitches and say, okay, I just made a single, so it must be time for a double, or I just made a double, so it must be time for a single. And you can double check to make sure you haven't gotten off track, because you're always going to be working into the other type of stitch. Now, there are lots of variations of the lemon peel stitch. Some of them are worked over an even number of stitches, but this one is worked over an odd number of stitches. Either way works. But it's basically alternating single crochet and double crochet. In fact, I'm working on a pattern using this stitch right now. It goes by a few different names besides the lemon peel stitch. I've heard it called other names as well in the past, but lemon peel seems to be the most popular one in the last few years. Now, when we get to the end of our third row repeat, we're going to need to put that last single crochet in the top of the chain 3. So again, if you're using a chain 3 substitute, you'll put your single crochet, that last single crochet for row 3, right in the top of whatever that stitch is. I always like to take the time to make sure I find those top 2 loops there of that chain, and then go right into that third chain right there. Make sure you pulled that one through. Mine's a little bit tight. I probably wish it was just a little bit looser. But we can pull our hook through. There we go. Use the other fingers to give a little help. Like I say, with this yarn, you have to give it a little extra tug sometimes because it likes to sort of really grip onto itself. But there is our single crochet worked into our double crochet or our chain 3, whatever we like to put there. But that is basically it. We keep repeating. Row 2 begins with a double crochet or a chain 3, ends with a double crochet. And row 3 begins with a single crochet, ends with a single crochet. So our instructions tell us to repeat the last 2 rows, rows 2 and 3, until the blanket measures 60 inches long. So you don't have to worry about ending necessarily on a row 2 repeat versus a row 3 repeat. Personally, I think ending on a row 3 repeat, that's hard to say. Ending on a row 3 repeat is a little bit better just because you kind of started on a row with a single crochet, and the single crochet is just a little bit tighter here on the ends, so that's what I would recommend. But honestly, like I say, you can work this pattern just as long as you'd like it to be. I've seen I've seen a couple other names for it. People are mentioning the crunch stitch. I think I've seen it called the grit stitch before, although that's been used on a couple different things. The fun, part of the adventure of crochet is that there's several different names for most of these things, especially once you combine the stitches into stitch patterns. But like I say, right now lemon peel is really popular for this one as well. So on our slightly larger swatch here, you can see I did just a couple more rows, repeated the 2 and 3 one more time. You can see how those double crochets really just crunch right down and create all that beautiful texture. You can see here I've ended with a single crochet row at the beginning and end, and I think it just, yeah, it just squares it up a little bit more. So I did mention when you have your ends to weave in, you'll want to go ahead and sew those down. So like I say, you can use matching sewing thread if you like, if you have it. I find that when you sew those ends together, the thread really buries itself down in this yarn. It's kind of hard to see here, but if you've ever worked with Bernat blanket in any of its sizes, you know from working with it, there's all this fuzz, but there's a little core in here. You can't really pull it out and see it, but there's a little core in there. So you kind of want to just catch that a little bit as you sew back and forth through those two ends, whether it's, you know, tuck it down under some ends and just sew the end down, or you want to sew two ends together so you can keep going with your blanket. This blanket, as written, does call for 5 balls of yarn, so you can make it in 5 colors if you wanted to do 5 big, bold stripes. The options are really pretty endless. So let me just double check the comments and questions here and make sure there aren't any questions that I missed. If anybody's got any questions about the patterns. Thank you to Yarnspirations. They've been dropping the link into the chat. And like I say, you can go to yarnspirations.com. Definitely check out their collection of Bernat blanket patterns. There's so many wonderful choices. Hi, everybody. Yes, absolutely. Like I said earlier, you can use this with any weight of yarn you like. It does have the stitch multiple instructions, and I just recommend that you just chain to the width you like. Make sure it's an even number, and then work those 2 rows until you have the length you like. All righty. Yes, and you could absolutely use it again with any weight of yarn you like. So, and yes, there's a couple different versions. Some of them just begin with a single crochet and end with a double crochet. If you've got an even number of stitches, you can do that as well. The crunch stitch is half double crochet and slip stitch, Carla says. That's a great one too. Very similar. I like this one a little bit better because I think it's difficult to work into slip stitches, but you know, if slip stitches can be easier to work into as long as you remember to take that little pause before you pull that second loop through, and it will make it a lot easier to work into. So awesome. I think that covers all the questions. We can go ahead and come back to the other camera. I want to thank you again for joining me so much today. It has been so fun going over this pattern with you. I think it's really beautiful. Again, that link is in the chat, or if you're not on the chat right now, on the Yarnspirations Facebook page. It is the Bernat Lemon Peel Stitch Crochet Blanket, and I hope you enjoy making it. It is a whole lot of fun, and of course, Bernat Blanket Extra Thick is a phenomenal yarn for all sorts of projects and designs and patterns. So thick, so fun, so easy to use, great for working up super quick projects, so I hope you'll give it a try. Thanks again, and have a great day, everybody.